What's going on, guys? It's John DeYoung here, and today I want to talk to you about the Australian population and how it impacts on the property market. We'll be delving into all sorts of things such as deaths, births, migration, but essentially it all comes down to the main drivers of supply and demand. I can bang on about supply and demand all day, but I promise you I won't talk about supply again after this segment. Focusing on demand though, in terms of the property market, this represents the people who want to buy a dwelling to live in. And supply is obviously how many dwellings are available on the market. As the population increases, so does the demand for places to live in, and therefore so should the amount of dwellings. Of course, it all depends on the types of dwellings that there is demand for. If the population is increasing due to births, then there might be more members in the immediate family, and a 2-bedroom apartment or townhouse just doesn't cut it anymore, shifting their demand to a larger asset. This doesn't mean we should be focusing on birth rates to determine when 3-bedroom freestanding homes are going to skyrocket. Essentially, there's always going to be first-timers, upgraders, and downsizers throughout the whole market. I just wanted to emphasize that demand isn't a one-size-fits-all and has a correlation with population growth. Another common myth I wanted to bring to your attention is demand versus desire. We would all love to own our dream home in our ideal holiday destination and live there for the rest of our lives. However, majority of us still do need to earn an income and look after our children, requiring us to be close to that source of income or close to good schools. It could just be that the price of that holiday home is simply unaffordable. So although you may think there's high demand for that holiday house, it's actually more of a desire to live there rather than pure demand. A good measure for high demand for an individual dwelling is to rock up on auction day and see 10 or more people actually bidding for the property. That's demand in its rawest form. So location, housing affordability, and life stages all have an impact on the types of dwellings that are in demand. That's why it's crucial to dig further into how our population is broken up, rather than straight population growth. But before we get into it, don't forget to smash that like button. According to the Australian Government Centre for Population, there are 2 main ways Australia's population can grow. The first being internal changes in the population, also known as the natural increase, and this is essentially taking all the births in the country and minusing the deaths. The second way the population grows is by people entering into or departing Australia, and this is called net overseas migration, or NOM for short, and it's essentially arrivals into Australia minus departures out of Australia. Below that, in the national level, there's a third way that the population can grow or shrink. This is essentially the movement within Australia, and it's called the net internal migration, or NIM for short. And it's the same as migration except between states rather than countries. We can calculate it in the same way as arrivals minus departures, but within that state level. And to take this a step further, you can think about it the same migration between even suburbs or different streets. I'm an avid property podcast listener, and there's a ton of commentators who simply state that population growth in a specific area, say within a 5-year period, is a strong indicator for capital growth, and then they just leave it there. And this seems logical, right? As population increases, there's more demand. But there's so much more to this story, and even in some cases can be a false positive. Take brand new house and land estates, for example. Within 5 years, these estates can go from cow farms to peak hour madness, where there's essentially rows and rows and rows of brand new houses. This would, on paper, increase the population of people living in that area. But in terms of capital growth, well, there's an oversupply of new dwellings that will get sold first before there's any real growth. And there I go, I said supply again. Well, while I'm already in trouble, I may as well talk about apartments. There's been major talks of an oversupply of apartments in Australia, as we've seen cranes blot out the sun in our capital cities over recent years. But construction has seriously slowed down of late, and when that type of housing becomes more affordable, demand might well meet that supply level in the very near future. On top of this, because us Aussies love our family barbecues and backyard cricket, the thought of owning an apartment over a block of land isn't as enticing. However, if we have migration from overseas where apartments are much more common in their home country or even preferred, then there's a growing population of people who are in demand for that type of dwelling. I guess there's 2 main reasons that inspired me to make this video. The first is the fact that CoreLogic almost always include a population growth graph in their monthly reports. Population growth was 1.5% in the year to June, which sits just below the decade average of 1.6%. Quarterly change in the total population Australia, natural increase Australia, and overseas migration Australia. Yeah, so we're sort of seeing total population is sort of still growing, but at a flat rate. National increase in Australia has come down, yeah, significantly. So come on, millennials, we've got to be having kids, mate. No, I'm we're in that pressure at the moment, so I'm not holding you against it. But yeah, we're seeing that natural increase come down significantly in Australia, and then obviously a bit of overseas migration is happening. Secondly, there's a video that's been released by Mike Maloney that talks about how the generations before us have had a larger natural population increase, which once their kids reach their maximum earning potential in the economy, support their elders in retirement through the tax system.
This is the first time in most wealthy countries, there's a few exceptions, let's call it Sweden, Switzerland, and Australia, countries like that have a larger millennial or echo boom. But almost every other country has an echo boom that only comes up near the same heights or is much smaller, like Germany and Japan.
This echo boom here is what you're talking about.
So my question to people is, like you say, it is a pyramid. Each generation has been larger and more wealthy to help pay off the debts or the accumulation from an aging generation before them. What happens when the millennial is having to support a generation that's actually larger than them?
That was Harry S. Dent Jr. and notice that he said except for Australia at the start of that clip, which gives me some confidence. But then I started thinking about my generation, and if we slow down the rate of having kids, which we have seen a decline in the natural population rate, who is going to support us in retirement? I'll leave a full link of the video down in the description section below for more context. This is why it's essential to have migration into Australia. The requirement for both parents to now be in the workforce, combined with the cost of having kids that seems to be forever increasing, makes us reconsider how many kids we actually want. If we as a generation start to only have 1 or 2 kids, then theoretically we would need other sources of economic stimulation to support us in retirement. The whole point of being a property investor is to obviously not rely on the government in retirement and set ourselves up financially for the rest of our lives. However, not everyone can become a property investor. It just doesn't make sense mathematically. So in that sense, we don't want the economy to be unstable for the remaining retirees who require that government support. I've taken some statistics from the ABS, of which population projections have been said to be underquoted, but they are looking quite positive based on 3 different scenarios, taking assumptions of fertility, life expectancy, and overseas and interstate migration flows. Series A being higher assumptions, Series B being medium assumptions, and Series C being lower assumptions. If we take the Series A example from before and drill down into that state-based level, we can see that between 2027 and 2066, the gap in population between New South Wales and Victoria starts to shorten, and predictions of Victoria becoming the largest city have been forecasted, with around 14.5 million people by 2066. This isn't to say that Victoria is going to be the next big hotspot over the next 50 years due to that increasing population demand. We do have much more land heading north to continue to build out, but there is some recent data of New South Wales having negative interstate migration and Victoria having positive interstate migration. This isn't suggesting that everyone is just moving to Victoria. There are other states with some positive interstate migration, but I guess this is why those commentators comment on population growth being a big driver. But remember, there are 2 paths to demand and, well, I'm not going to say it, but just remember we can build up and out further. I guess in wrapping up, back to the Centre for Population, their focus is to improve Australia's ability to cope with this growing population. They've produced documentation around this, and it's not a bad read to try and understand where these population hotspots are, and in turn what government spending they are doing to deal with this growing population. Specifically, things like this statement about divesting 127 hectares of land in the Maribyrnong in Melbourne to cater for up to 6,000 new homes within 10 kilometres of the CBD. Subject to the approved planning framework, of course, but being someone who walks around the Maribyrnong every day, I'm very interested in this and the impact it's going to have. In final statements, I think it's best to take a holistic view of how the growing population will play out in Australia. Fundamentally, people want to go where the jobs are. However, if we're becoming a more technology-based working environment where we can work from home and AI is starting to take over some of those more complex jobs that require us to be in-house, demand to be extremely close to the CBD may fizzle down. On top of that, there are larger working hubs being established outside of our CBDs. And government spending on public transport such as the fast train will allow a quicker access into our CBDs, making the commute more accessible. I'm not suggesting that this would decrease the demand for housing close to our CBDs, but it will essentially be too unaffordable for the average income earners. What are your thoughts on the future of Australia's population, or do you have any other questions in relation to population and housing? leave them down in the comment section below. As always, seek your own professional financial, legal, taxation and property investing advice for your current situation. These videos are just my opinion and are general in nature and should never be considered as personal advice. If you're keen for more content, make sure you subscribe and smash that notification bell so you don't miss a video. And until next time, happy house hunting.